All right, people, another week, another episode, season 6, episode 4, entitled Book of the Stranger. We are banging these out as we are getting closer and closer to the battle for the Iron Throne. I'm joined once again by Professor Pat. Pat, do that jokey joke of the week today.
Yeah, listen, when you call me out on the joke, it makes it a little more diminished. But I think the Talking TV family right here that's Talking Thrones with us will agree that they've come to see the Book of the Stranger, right? You know, come and see. Every sentence we're going to say come and see because that's poetic, right?
Yes.
Right? That's Ramsay's poetry working for him.
Totally.
Come and see.
Yes. Yeah, poetic. Very much so. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Talking Thrones. I think it's funny that you explained the whole thing of, like, you know, diminishing returns when you ended up having to explain that joke, because I'm not going to lie, if you hadn't told me that, I probably wouldn't have gotten the joke at all. Oh, man, that just goes to show how much stuff ends up going over my head.
Man, Ramsay gets the award for best, like, you know, threatening letter in a TV show.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like it's crazy because after, like, I feel like kind of how down we were on Ramsay as far as, like, oh, no, like, you know, are they going too far with Ramsay last season? I feel like, surprisingly enough, like, the minimalistic usage of him combined with, like, them bringing back everything that we loved and simultaneously hated about him as a character in the first place, I feel like he's kind of restored. He's back on top. For me, Ramsay wins this season, hands down, because the crazy part is that after this episode, we don't see him again until the Battle of the Bastards. It's actually kind of nuts.
Yeah, I think, you know, basically, I think what they mishandled was him usurping, you know, Roose Bolton.
I agree.
And that's the fact. You know, it's one of those things where it could have been a little more subtle. It could have been a little more impactful. Like you're talking about moments with these shows where it's like, oh my, they caught me off guard. I didn't expect that to happen, or I didn't expect it to happen that way. With that, they just sort of have him go in for a hug and be like, "Gotcha."
Gotcha.
You know, and it's like, okay, like
really, I feel like it's really
no suspense, no nothing.
I feel like it's really the crowning achievement of the Gotcha Bowl. But people, this is it, season 6, episode 4, Book of the Stranger, and it's really interesting because I feel like when it comes to big, like massive moments that happen in certain episodes, I feel like this one is kind of forgotten because there's a lot of big stuff that happens in this episode, like a lot. Like I'm like rewatching this, especially after I would say kind of a little bit of a letdown of a third episode, you know, with that last week's episode that we did. Man, I forgot how much stuff happened. You get Jon reuniting with Sansa in this episode. You get the big Daenerys, you know, burning down the cows and basically taking control of the Dothraki. You get Theon going home for the first time in a while. You have Ramsay kind of solidifying his position by killing Osha. You have the beginning of, you know, the plot machinations that the High Sparrow is doing. Like one of the things I will say in hindsight that I kind of didn't give one of the storylines this season enough credit for was kind of the High Sparrow and his plotting and his machinations behind the scenes, because that's one of those things where it's kind of like old school Game of Thrones where it's so subtle and it's built up that when the moment comes, you almost don't realize that it's been built up to. Because I remember watching when the moment happens 2 episodes from now, when the High Sparrow kind of reveals his new allegiance with Tommen and Marjorie, and I'm almost like, where the hell did that come from? But rewatching it, it's one of those things where I notice how built up it has been, and it fits too because that's also the moment that references the title of this episode, The Book of the Stranger, which is obviously the passage from the 7-pointed star that the High Sparrow was attempting to use to get Marjorie on his side. But like I said, this is a banger of an episode. There is so much that is happening, that is so many significant events that are happening, so much that is continuing to fast track us and speed us towards the finale of the Battle of the Bastards. It feels like we kind of have gotten all of the exposition and setup of the story out of the way, and now we're getting into the middle sect of the story. So let's just get into it, man. So unlike last week, we're going to start with the Wall. Big moment right here. Jon, he has renounced his vow. He has said, my watch has ended. I have died and come back to life. I am no longer the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. And he's about to leave despite Dolores Ed's very logical complaint saying, you know, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? You're just going to leave us here right now, you know, right when we're about to have the fight of our lives. And he's like, dude, I died already. Like, I don't know what else you want.
Well,
from me,
Jon it's like game over. It's like, yeah, I died. Game's over. I don't have to do any of this. We have to take Winterfell. No, I don't.
Yeah.
You
I don't
know,
have to do anything.
it's very interesting. Just like he's obviously he just got resurrected. He doesn't really know what to do, how to really interpret that. So it's one of those things where John as a character is lost at this moment. He just knows that the path he was on was just bad, and that he's no longer going to follow things based on honor, right? We talked in season 1, 2, and 3. This whole idea where people that follow honor are misguided in this hunt for the game of the throne. And for the most part, I think John's rethinking that, and he's also rethinking everything. So when Sansa says, we got to go take, and Winterfell and save Rickon, he kind of hesitates and stares at her, and he's like, yeah, sure, just
Well, that's
because
what's so
that's
interesting.
expected of him,
It's
and
obviously it's the
he's thinking
biggest
otherwise.
it's the biggest, most talked about moment. John's about to leave when literally Sansa, Brienne, and Pod finally arrive at the wall, and it's this big built up hype moment. It's one of those moments that felt like so big and built up and hyped up that you almost didn't believe that it was actually going to happen. Kind of the irony that, okay, over the last couple of episodes, Sansa is trying to get to the walls, she's trying to get to Jon. But John's dead, so they're like, oh, well, what's gonna happen if she gets there and she meets Alistair Thorne standing over John's corpse, what's gonna happen there? But so. And the other thing, too, obviously, that's so impactful about the moment is that it's the first time we've gotten a Stark reunion of any kind since the first episode. Like, these characters, the thing that was so impactful, and again, was one of many other things about this season that was kind of lessened by the last couple seasons, is that the Starks have spent a significant amount of time apart from each other. You really only had Sansa and Arya together for the rest of season 1, before they ended up being split apart after Arya was able to escape from King's Landing. Robb and Bran together for a little bit in King's Landing before Robb unfortunately ended up going south with Catelyn, and then they unfortunately both met their demise. But, the last 4 surviving stars, or 5 in this case, but although not for long, Jon, Sansa, Bran, and Arya, who obviously all finally end up reuniting by the time season 8 comes around. And this is the beginning of it, And in the moment, I will say it was huge. It was impactful because I've been rewatching all the episodes up to that point, because that was a big thing. Like there was something about season 6 when that came out, besides it just being the first season that had surpassed the books, where I'm like, okay, like this is that we're actually starting to move. We're to quote, to quote Doctor Strange from Infinity War, like we're in the end game now. We're moving towards the finale. And obviously, again, lessened by what came after it, but in the moment, super, super impactful. And this is the beginning of it. And of course, it's one of those things where in hindsight, I'm not sure how I feel about it, because in order to kind of build more so off the point that I was making last week, this is the beginning of Jon not really calling the shots anymore. This is the beginning of Jon kind of starting to be led around by a lot of other characters. And it wasn't as apparent to me in the moment because, again, it makes sense as to why Sansa would be calling the shots here. Jon hasn't been at Winterfell in years at this point. He literally just came back from the dead. He doesn't even really know who Ramsay is. He's not really aware of what's been going on in the North in general, because he's been so focused on serving the Night's Watch and trying to prep everyone for the coming battle with the White Walkers, and doing what he can to save the wildlings. And he quite literally just came back from the dead. And Sansa's here. They have this great reunification. They do some exchanging some memories. It's rather interesting too, because if I'm not mistaken, I don't think Jon and Sansa had a single scene together in that pilot when they were all still together at Winterfell. So it's certainly interesting to see here, them playing off certain dynamics before Sansa kind of immediately moves into, where are you going to go? And he's like, I'm not really sure. And she's like, well, we got to take back Winterfell, and he's like, and they get into some legit arguments where he's like, I'm tired of fighting. I came back from the freaking dead. I don't know how many times I have to admit that and enunciate that for you to understand that. I literally just hung a kid outside, his corpse still hanging right outside there. He's like, I can show you if you want, And so I definitely think that while Sansa definitely does make some legit points, I feel like there's something here to where, like, she's the one that's kind of motivating him to do everything, what I will say, though, apropos of that, is that this is also the beginning of, Sansa's kind of upward turn, where after seeing season after season after season of Sansa being downtrodden, this is also finally the beginning of her, like, path to, triumphant and eventually becoming Queen of the North by the end of the series, which I think is one of the few things that they did get right in the finale. But I don't know. What's your take on all that?
Well, Dom, I think the main thing here is that Jon last season saw the Night King, and he saw the Night King raise all the dead. He died, and then this season he gets resurrected. And I don't think they explore this, but the psychological impact of, seeing what the Night King does to the dead and raise them, and then, himself going through a death and resurrection, has a little bit of basically psychological impact on the character. Like, I don't think he really knows how to take it. And I don't think they really explore it in the show, but they definitely show that he's, hesitant. He's somewhat disassociative from, the situation that's going on. And, he's kind of recovering in this circumstance right now. So I think, there's a certain amount of trauma that he's experienced that he's still trying to work through. And I could totally see when they're reading Ramsay's note and Ramsay's, taunting him, come and see, I'll kill you all, come and see. And he doesn't want to read the note. It's kind of like he's already dealt with people like this and he doesn't want to do it anymore. And then Sansa perfectly happy with reading the note because she's obsessed. She wants her revenge. She wants to get her home back. She wants to save her brother. So yeah, Sansa at this point is someone that was under the tutelage of Littlefinger, went through the whole trauma stage herself. And now she's here willing to start playing the game. Whereas Jon just lost the game. And he has to be given a reason to come back. And I don't think, taking Winterfell and saving Rickon necessarily is like the first thing on his mind. The first thing on his mind is like, am I going to become a zombie? I think there's...
Am I a zombie? I'm not quite
sure.
sure.
Yeah, exactly. They don't really play with that. It's like they kind of mention it like, oh, am I the same person? Is that you in there? Like all those phrases from the last couple episodes. But, ultimately, I think, Jon is traumatized from this, and now he's being kind of thrust into this big battle that's coming up. So I wish they played with it a little more. Like, obviously he has some moody backs and forths in the upcoming episodes with Sansa, but, they don't necessarily play it as like he doesn't know what he's doing anymore or lost his convictions. They kind of just play it as, oh, that's just Jon. I think it would be better if it was, a little more kind of, he was a more emotional character at this point because of the trauma that he went through. And ultimately, I think they just drop it by the end of the season. Like he kind of just becomes the Warden of the North, does his thing. He turns back to the Night King. And there's not really a complete arc of his, resurrection trauma. It's just sort of, underlaying this entire season of how he acts and what his decision making and how he treats and kind of interacts with Sansa. So it's there, but I don't think it's necessarily in our faces. It's going to be very subtle, and as we watch the rest of the season, we're going to be able to track that.
I agree. It's kind of the biggest kind of let's call it like looked over hidden flaw of season 6, which is that it's almost kind of the same problems with season 5, but also the opposite in the sense of where season 5, there were storylines that felt dragged out and just wasted to the point of like, what are we doing here? Season 6, with certain of the storylines, not all of them, but certain of them, specifically the big ones, I find it feels like they are again just trying to get through and speed through all the motions in order to get to it. Like Jon should be traumatized from coming back from the dead, but he kind of just quickly gets over it once Sansa gives him that pep talk and they can start going and recruiting the wildlings and all the northern houses so they can start to muster their forces. Cersei, I feel like, should be taking a little bit longer to get over the trauma of having been paraded through the streets naked, but is now seemingly real quick and right back on this hellish revenge quest against the Sparrows. Same thing with Daenerys. Daenerys really, especially at the end of this episode. We'll get to that when we cover her part at the end of this episode and that whole sequence and some other problems that I have with that. But she immediately is just like, yeah, fuck it. I'm just gonna. I already know that I'm the unburned, so I'm just gonna go for it. I'm literally just gonna rush through this thing.
I think Cersei basically has the break, from season 5 to 6, so we can, as viewers, excuse the fact that she's, has less outward trauma because we can assume that more time has gone by. That's and fair. With the mountain, there to sort of be her new protector and just the scenes that we see where he just like brutally murders people. He basically is willing to take on like 10 Knights Guards all by himself. Like the fact is, Cersei's sort of protected. She's like in a cocoon, but you know she now feels protected, and she's must be furious. You know, it must be like, how did this happen to me? You know, I need to get my revenge. Like this is her basically getting angrier and angrier because of the walk of shame. So I think it's one of those things that she probably is traumatized, but she's immediately turned to being sort of reclusive and angry, and that's how she's going to sort of deal with that situation.
Yeah, it's just definitely capable of dealing with it in a different way. Well, I mean, you mentioned, so let's get to the two kind of quick offshoot storylines that kind of spring forward from the north. You know, obviously, again, Jon finally makes the decision after Ramsay directly threatens the wildlings, and he asks Tormund how many fighting men they have, and he's like, like they have a lot, but, you know, not enough. And he's like, okay, well, if we form an alliance between the wildlings and the rest of the northern houses that aren't allied with Ramsay, we might actually have a shot, you know. Although, what kind of problem that I have, how the fuck does Sansa know that Ramsay killed Roose? Like, that happened after the fact, you know, but so he's reading the letter, and he's like, you know, when he says Lord of Winterfell, and she's like, oh, that means, you know, he's Warden of the North now. He killed his father. Like she already knew it. It's like, it would have been one thing if they wrote it where she was able to guess that happened because she knows, you know, because she spent time with him and she knows that he's capable of that. But like, it's almost like she already knew it. I'm like, what, did you intercept a raven that just happened to be that raven that happened to be flying? How do you know that? You know, like, it's just one of those things where I'm like, come on, guys.
Yeah, you know, I think in the way it probably plays in the scene. Yeah, it's just a line of dialogue. Like, I think it's one of those things where, you know, Sansa's up to speed with us because we know she knows, type of thing. And I think that's sort of, you know, in terms of like realism, do you really want to go through another like 2 minutes of her explaining why she thinks Ramsay killed Bruce? I mean, so I think it's more of a streamline.
Like 2 minutes long. It's definitely more so streamlining, but it's one of those things where, again, you and I feel like have been, you know, going back and forth on this, where you talk about streamlining and I talk about, it's like, I think it's just a simple matter of a few choice words that are differently, and I think it adds that much like more context to the scene, you know. But like I said, that's neither here nor there. So now,
it's to go through later in the season, you know, Sansa starts to think like Ramsay and starts to anticipate his moves, and so this could have been an opportunity to do that.
Exactly.
Really show that she's anticipating him.
Exactly. So, two quick spin-offs that kind of cover the scene. The only scene that we get of Ramsay, and again, the last that we get of Ramsay before the obviously, you know, his big defeat in the Battle of the Bastards, obviously, you know, the Osha seduction scene. So let me ask you this, Pat, because I've been racking my brain, I've been trying to figure this out. Is this a good scene or no? Because I've been going back and forth, and I'm really at a loss at this scene. Obviously, famously, Osha attempted to seduce Ramsay. Ramsay very easily figuring out, obviously, you know, that she pulled the same ploy on Theon, and so as a result, you know, killing her before she gets a chance to kill him.
Well, yeah, because he tortured Theon, so he knows everything, right?
He knows.
And I think, you know, it is a good scene because, one, Osha hasn't been around for such a long time. And really, for the audience, you're relying on the summary of what we know about her character, right? We know that she is a good talker, that she's very much, you know, deceptive. And so it kind of throws us right into that. She's going to try to use the skills that she knows how to use to get herself out of this situation. But in counter to that, Ramsay's going to use the skills that he has. And it's sort of like Ramsay trumps Osha in terms of the battle of their skills. So, you know, I think it's one of those things where they wanted to get Osha out of the way and they needed to kill her. And so they put together this, you know, I think a quick, clever scene between the two of them where Ramsay's clearly going to get the upper hand and kill her, you know, just to kind of get her character out of the way. She's no longer needed because, you know, ever since she left Bran, Rickon was no longer needed either. And now it's like they only need Rickon for the start of the Battle of the Bastards. And so it's like they just got to reduce the body count here and just get rid of characters that, you know, obviously they could have just like found Rickon and then Osha, you know, Rickon could have said like, oh, she ran away.
Right.
and we never saw her again.
Exactly. Like,
So they had their chance to kind of give her a little bit of a more pleasant disappearance from the show, but in this essence, it kind of gives us a small, I think, well written scene. I like the fact that they kind of go back and forth about what is it they have a little back and forth before the seduction starts, and I forgot what it was
something
about, but
something about like oh, you used to serve the Starks, and she's like, oh, one lord is another, she's like,
oh,
you
it
could be
was
that whole thing.
the flayed
The
man,
flayed
right?
man, yeah, that's right, the
Right,
flayed
because
man.
it's like, oh my, your banner's the flayed man, and it's like, yeah, I like to do that, or whatever Ramsay
Yeah.
says, and then she's like, do you eat them afterwards? And Ramsay's like, no,
And
and
she's
then
like, then I've seen worse.
yeah, exactly. So it's referring to the cannibals that we've already seen in the
Right.
show.
Could
So
potentially be alluding to the fact that the Boltons may be descended from like some some of the worse off wildlings, because that's the thing that's been established, obviously, is the fact that the wildlings and the Northerners do share the same blood because they're all descended from the first men, or at least a majority of them are. So
yeah, so I think there's a little playfulness in the beginning of that scene with the whole flayed man and the wildlings and the cannibals, and so is it a short scene? Yes. Is it one of those scenes that basically is there to eliminate one of the I would say relatively beloved characters because there's no point to Osho anymore? Yeah, so it's economical, but again, I think it's probably the best that we could have gotten, because if you look at all the other ways they could have made her disappear, it's basically Rickon was
right,
found killed in the woods. Like, who? Oh,
right,
Rickon was with some woman. We killed her.
exactly.
It could have been just a line of dialogue that got rid of her. So we got to see one last attempt at her, trying to utilize her skills and basically take out Ramsay. But even
But alas,
Ramsay, yeah,
it was
Ramsay's
not meant to be.
just, he's unfortunately too good. He's too evil to be
Right,
stopped by anything, and so
exactly.
it just adds to his resume of reasons why he might win the Battle of the Bastards.
And like, look, I can't even say that it's one of those things where they deviated too far from the books, because the last that we even hear of Rickon and Osha in the books is when Davos is going south while Stannis is still alive, attempting to recruit Northern Lords for Stannis, and he has made a deal by one of the Northern Lords, the Manderleys, and is that he will declare for Stannis if Davos is able to bring Rickon back, because the Manderleys have discovered that Rickon is alive because Osha is taken into this island of Skagos, which is supposed to be home to like this brutalistic cannibal tribe. So like, but again, that was kind of where we left off there in the books, and that was about it. So I can't even really say that it's something that would like deviated so far to a point where it didn't even make sense. But who knows? So ugh. Sorry, I was just reacting to that. So that brings us to another character that we hadn't seen in a while, which is Littlefinger. Littlefinger's finally back after a couple episodes where we haven't seen him. He left us, I want to say, like it was like episode 6 or 7 of last season. We haven't seen him in a while, and oh man, we thought that Littlefinger was done just transforming from the smartest man in Westeros to the biggest idiot in Westeros. Nope, not at all. He is back to just, I mean, he's still pulling off crafty schemes, but it's still a point where it's like, really? People still can't see the holes here? Like, come on.
Yeah,
Like,
well, hey, listen, if you're on his good side, you're getting a falcon. That's
yeah,
all I'm saying.
yeah, that's true.
So
And Royce, unfortunately, despite the fact that his common sense is trying. Like, that's the thing that hurts so much about the scene. It is a scene where common sense is trying. It is fighting to get through the barrier of stupidity that has just been generated everywhere where this character goes. Where Lord Royce is like, yeah, somehow magically when Sansa left with you, she ended up in Winterfell and the Boltons. And Littlefinger's response is, oh, on the road we were set upon. Nobody else knew of our location and where we were going. And Royce is like, really, dude? Really? You're going to get that from me? But then, of course, he
yeah,
turns to Robin, and Robin still doesn't know any better and doesn't know anything. And then, of course, he's able to manipulate the situation in his
okay.
favor
Robin
again.
is so disinterested and 100%. I don't, the Falcon. That's like the only gift he gave him, and like he's just
That's
willing to be
all it
like,
takes.
yeah,
That's all it takes.
whatever little finger wants, he gets. I guess you're right, Lord Baelish. It's oh my god, this character Robin he's one of those characters where you want to reach through the screen and set him straight in some
Yes.
way. You just get so angry that there is this person in the world, and hey, listen, it's played to a T. It's meant to represent the young lord that just does not understand the bigger game that's being played. And, it's because he's blasé about certain decisions that Littlefinger is able to easily manipulate him, easily put pressure on, someone like Royce, who's been, a general for, several generations of his family. Like they've been leading the army of the Vale.
Yep.
So like,
Yeah, I mean,
it's
Royce
one
even
of
talks about it in the next season that he was around, like he was even a little bit older, when they originally went to war with the Mad King. So
yeah. So it's one of those things where Littlefinger has everything like locked down in the Vale. He is the Lord for the most part because he can manipulate Robin no problem. And even though people can openly see his schemes and talk about them out loud, even in front of Robin, Robin doesn't care. And Robin's not going to do anything about it. Robin just sort of trusts that if he continues, supporting Lord Baelish will take care of him with whatever gift comes his way, like a falcon or whatever.
I guess just the reason why I'm raising so much ire about Littlefinger is that while he's not necessarily doing anything that betrays his character per se, as far as kind of using characters to his, to his advantage. Obviously, again, there's been a consistent history of that throughout. It's just the fact of where it feels like they're jumping through too many hoops in order to make him consistently prioritize Sansa to a point where he can't really see past his love for her, which just goes completely again. It breaks away from his character because, again, this is a character who has always prioritized himself over anything else. Like, yes, for sure, he does have people that he cares about, whatever that means. But at the end of the day, he's what's it called? He's all about self-preservation. That's the only thing that matters to him. So the fact that he is consistently, making these mistakes, the fact that he thinks that he's going to be able to so easily win Sansa over to his side by presenting the Knights of the Vale as this massive fighting force in order to win at Winterfell, and even to the point where even she knows that they're going to need him. It's still one of those things where it's like, dude, it's like, I feel like you could have just gotten so much more if you just, presented them to her in the first place, and just done what they did in the books, which was waited out in the Vale, which again has remained pretty isolated and untouched by the rest of Westeros, and wait for the powers that be to fight. It's just like,
again,
like I said,
what is his game plan? Like,
that's what I'm saying.
Obviously, he delivered Sansa to the Boltons, and he was supporting the Boltons because he wanted them in the north and basically the Lannisters in the south, and he wanted there to be tension because the Boltons, would not necessarily, kneel down to the Lannisters. So he wanted to create some sort of north and south tension between those kingdoms. And then what was he going to do? Just wait till they kind of like imploded each other? Or like, what's his game plan to really rise from Lord of the Vale up to the throne? It's kind of muddy to me. Like, is it sort of, somehow letting them fight a little bit and then figuring out a way to help Sansa usurp him? It's really not quite clear to me what Lord Baelish is doing in these last couple seasons. Obviously he wants to climb the ladder and get onto the throne. But are things just like not going his way, or are they basically too hard? Like he's not thinking right. I'm not quite sure what's going on with his scheming and planning at this point. Yeah. Like he got himself to be a lord, and he got himself to be like an ally of both Cersei and the Boltons, but ultimately, like, where is that going to get him, closer to that throne?
Yeah, exactly. It's to the point, like I said, it's a complete betrayal of his character. It was the first sign where I really started to realize where we were in trouble, because Littlefinger has always consistently been the smartest character, to the point where he was even able to outwit Varys, who was another character that, again, was brilliant when we were first introduced to him. This character, it was the thing that was always admirable about the two of them, is the fact that they were both not descended from royalty. They were both from Essos. They both started off with nothing and kind of scratched and clawed their way up to the positions where they were. It's kind of what made them admirable. It's the fact that they weren't high lords, and they got where they were through sheer work and very fierce intelligence and an understanding of the game. And now you have these two characters literally just kind of playing roughshod and making decisions that make no sense, simply in order to gear the plot, in order to make the plot go where it needs to. And so it's just, it sucks, because I'm not gonna say Littlefinger, I will say Littlefinger was one of my favorite characters. And to just see this, it's just a complete an utter betrayal of his character, seeing what was once such a brilliant character just completely brought down. Well, just completely brought down to this basic writing stupidity. You know, like I said, it's there. Benioff and Weiss are able to get away with it with a decent amount of the other characters because for the most part, again, with the main characters, they're still able to, you know, for the most part, stick true to their arcs and what those characters were at their core. But it's with the ancillary characters like Littlefinger and Varys where the cracks really start to shine through the armor, even in seasons like this one that do it slightly better than some of the weaker ones. So,
yeah, I just don't know where his character is really going. Like, obviously, he helps Sansa. The North is happy. Like, was he thinking that he was going to eventually marry her? But like, that doesn't make any sense because, you know, when he suggests that she go to the Boltons and marry him, she got traumatized, and so, you know, he is the reason why Ramsay assaulted her. And therefore, she's never really going to support him. You know, deep down, there's going to be a hatred. You did this to me. And I just don't know what he's thinking. You know, and that's the whole thing of like also pitting, you know, obviously this is going down into future episodes, but trying to pit Sansa and Arya against each other. Like, they're sisters. Like, their bond is going to be, you know, pretty thick. And so it's one of those things where Littlefinger from this point on definitely is treading water, and it's hard to say, like, what was he thinking? Like, you know, why'd he go from such a masterful character to someone that makes some really big mistakes and didn't seem to anticipate that he was doing so.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so begrudgingly, even though I begrudgingly we have to stop in Meereen, even though it's like I said, it's the reason why I think actually that Meereen this season trumps Dorne last season, because at the very least we weren't in Dorne every single episode. We didn't even really get Dorne until the second episode of last season, but then we had to spend a couple episodes traveling there. We had to build it up, and then when we got to it, it was like over with within a couple of episodes, and then they just kind of spent the rest of the time. With Meereen, it's like we have to spend at least some bit of it every single episode there.
This episode, we get a good scene. It's basically Tyrion decides, hey, we're going to do things my way. We're going to invite the masters of the other cities around. We're basically going to say, like, listen, you know, with Daenerys in the area, you know, the world is going to change. Slavery is going to disappear, whether you like it or not. The question is, you know, you were rich because of slaves, but why don't we give you 7 years to implement a new system in which allows you to be rich, but slavery is abolished? So basically, you know, instead of owning other people, you're creating a sort of, you know, economic system where you're going to have winners and losers. And obviously the masters are the ones who have fixed the system in this case.
Yeah.
And they're going to still be the winners. They're just not going to have slaves, or, you know, they're going to have to get rid of some of the more brutal practices associated with that. So Tyrion's being pragmatic at this point and saying, like, listen, you don't have to give up your wealth. You just got to give up your slaves. And that's what he's hoping, that the masters will sort of be like, this guy is right. You know, we can still maintain our position without supporting this institution of slavery. And, you know, to basically dot the I's and cross the T's on this deal, he brings some Marine women in and says, hey, you know, this is my gift to you, and hopefully you consider my proposal. And he leaves, and Grey Worm and Missandei really think he's lost his mind, that the masters, all they do is use people, and they think the latest person that they're using is Tyrion. Right. And Tyrion thinks he's actually has this, you know, knack of negotiation, but the masters have always been that way. And Grey Worm, you know, points this out to him, that, you know, this is something they've been for generations. They just look for a way to use everybody. And
It's once
so
again
they're
to
looking
me.
to use you in some way.
Right, and that to me is like is kind of the chink and where the loose thread that unravels this entire plotline. Because you're right, well, all of those things kind of stand there in theory as far as what the scene is trying to accomplish. It's weighed down by a lot of different things. Number one, the fact that Grey Worm and Missandei are 100% right about the fact that Tyrion thinks that he's got one up on the Masters when really it's the Masters are once again just running roughshod on him, completely manipulating him because Tyrion again has no understanding of just really how they operate. Again, he attempts to be a negotiator when, again, like Grey Worm says, violence is the only thing that they understand. Number two, he's creating more of a rift between Grey Worm and Daenerys, who, again, are really his only two other supporters in this situation besides Varys. Like I said, the people of Meereen do not know Tyrion. They don't, they barely know him. They have very little reason to trust him. Again, he's another rich, and from their perspective, he's another rich guy from across the narrow sea who has absolutely no understanding. He's just another foreign invader to them. And what's worse is Tyrion is that Grey Worm is forced to side with Tyrion in order to maintain the peace, which is a complete betrayal of his character and kind of is really diminishing to the fact that it's like, wow, you're almost spitting in their face as far as them being former slaves now kind of being forced to accept this system, this new system that you're in place, which doesn't even end up working because the first minute that they get, the Masters just turn around and immediately attack them. So, like, I like, it would be one thing if this if this worked for a little bit, and then obviously, and before
Well, it works for a couple episodes.
For a couple episodes, but again, it's like over the course of time, it's like at the end of the day, like what did this really accomplish in hindsight? It's just another thing of where it's like they're spinning their wheels in order to try and keep this storyline.
They're clearly waiting for Daenerys to come back with the Dothraki army and reunite with her dragons and all that stuff so that she can be the one that is the decisive
but I guess my problem is not necessarily with what they're building to. It's just how much of a complete betrayal of Tyrion's arc this is, because again, this is not some other like schmuck. This is Tyrion Lannister. This is the smartest character, or one of the smartest characters in the entire show. There is a reason why he was able to run circles around everybody that gave Ned Stark such a headache within the first two in season 2 of Game of Thrones. Like he even said, it's like because he understands the game. And sure, I guess you could make the argument that he's in an area where he doesn't know, but it's just the fact of it's like Tyrion should know better than this. He should be able to navigate his way around this, And the fact that he is just so clearly out of his depth and then once again gets rewarded for it. Like I said, I'm going to sound like a broken record because I'm going to talk about it every single time we hit this plot line, but like it's true because we see what the results are. He literally screws up to the point where the Masters end up attacking them, has to rely on Daenerys and the dragons and the Dothraki coming in to save the day, and then is rewarded as Hand of the King for what? For getting the people of Meereen back on Daenerys' side, whom she then immediately abandons in the aftermath to go sail to Westeros. Like, it's a Russian nesting doll of stupidity, and it consistently is to me like one of the weakest storylines of the entire show, let alone this season. So
yeah, I think in terms of watching it week to week and not really knowing what's coming, it essentially is just laying the groundwork, and like you said, spinning the plate until we get to the sequence where Daenerys defeats the Masters. And so I guess I'm not really too bothered by it. When I'm watching it for like the first time, I'm sort of like, okay, Tyrion is trying his best. Didn't quite work out. But yeah, in retrospect, after watching it 2-3 times, it becomes very apparent that they don't really have this in-depth storyline for Meereen. They're just kind of like waiting to the major plot point.
Which again, I mean, this goes in depth of the thing that we always say, which is, again, if the people who are making the show don't care about these storylines and these characters, then why do we care? I think this is the point where I think that's why this is the point where people really started to say, yeah, it's beyond clear that of all these storylines, Benioff and Weiss cared the least about Dorne last season, which is why everybody complained about it, and they cared the least about Meereen this season, which is why, again, it's just like a sore thumb in every single episode. And I think
I think they pick and choose each season kind of what they want to focus on, because and we can quickly talk about this, like the Iron Islands. Theon finally escapes. He finally gets there, and he's talking to Yora, and Yora's like, tell me what you want, and it's like, I want you to be the ruler of the Iron Islands.
Right.
And,
it's like,
so he finally gives up his birthright And it's like the two of them have like a lot to say to each other,
Yeah.
but basically, she cuts through the red tape. She's just basically saying, spit it out, tell me
Yeah.
exactly what you want, so I can deal with this before I got to deal with our uncle. And he finally just says, like, I support you. And this is a great moment for Theon. Like, it's finally gives him cause. Someone finally accepts him, after he says what he wants as clearly as he has ever done in this show. And I got this sense watching this scene again. I'm just like, hell yeah, the Greyjoys are back. And then I know
Yeah.
what happens the rest of the series.
And then you know what happens the rest of yeah,
So
it's
like,
one of those things where of all the
like,
storylines, I think there are two storylines this season, like I said, that are just complete wastes of time build up in hindsight. It's Meereen and the Iron Islands, which again, like
yeah,
I said,
but the Iron Islands, they just do so well this season to bring it back, hype it up, and then they drop the ball. Like Theon
completely
just
dropped the
literally
ball.
becomes a bodyguard for Bran in the garden, and that's about it. And
Yeah.
it's
I
just
mean,
lame.
I'll say this: the acting for me saves this scene because I don't know what it is, but it's like I like I said, with different storylines having a different effect on me. For me, it's like the Iron Islands just because of where they wrap up and kind of what they do with it. Because again, they seem to be building to this really, really big triumphant moment where the Iron Islanders can finally kind of reclaim their glory after kind of being looked down upon by the west of Westeros, by the rest of Westeros. Try saying that 10 times fast. For the entire show, and they finally have seemed to gain this position of respect only to then immediately just be relegated to the background while Theon goes and acts like a glorified bodyguard. So, like I said, for me, like the Iron Islands could literally just go away as far as I'm concerned. So the only thing that
Yeah,
saves
it's
this
still
is Gemma
good this
Whalen and
season.
Alfie
I'm
Allen
I'm gonna
acting.
enjoy.
So
I'm gonna enjoy. I think every scene this season with the Iron Islands. Hey,
yeah.
put that prediction
I don't know.
down.
I don't know. I'll put that in like my little ticker box of like ironically laughing at a sequence because I know how bad it's gonna get, even though it is good in the moment. I will say that.
I think season 7, season 8. Yeah, Theon and you, Yora are. Yeah, it
Yeah,
doesn't
we'll get to
really.
that. I'm gonna have some interesting,
Whatever.
very, very controversial hot takes when we get to season 7. Like I think of I think of the last two seasons. Obviously, naturally, I'm looking forward to that one more because I just enjoy that one more. But I don't know. I'm gonna have some interesting takes there. So let's get to the last two big ones before the end. Let's hit King's Landing. So big stuff here, big setup here, which is where what's it called? Again, it's another one of those storylines where it doesn't seem like that much is happening, but it actually is tremendous because we only get like what 2 or 3 scenes here, and while again they don't seem like it seems like they're building up to one thing. Obviously, it's one of those things where kind of rewatching it again, it's one of those sequences that is almost made better because you know what the twist is going to be, and so you know how things are building up. So it obviously starts off with the High Sparrow visiting with Marjorie. The High Sparrow, as we've come to learn from last episode, has already gotten in Tommen's ear and Loras' ear. So now he's getting and trying to get to Marjorie as well. But Marjorie, the one thing I will give her credit for is Marjorie seems to be the only character, at least within the High Sparrow's grasp, that is not just completely falling for his BS. And so was able to, and this is the episode where, if anything, it's a reading situation where he's trying to read her so much. And he's trying to inform her of all of this different stuff that happened in his past. He tells her of this, of his origin, about how he was a shoemaker and how he eventually got to where he was because he tried to act like a wealthy person and all this bullshit.
That was a great story. So basically, he's shoemaker. He was doing well. He invested all his time, and that's really what people paid for. All the time you did to put the bells and whistles on the shoes, and he crafts this really good story about how his wealth outpaced his father's, and essentially, one night he was having this feast and it was an orgy, and he woke up, and then that's when he realized he had to walk away from it because of how gross he had become.
Yeah, it's a good story, like I said, and once again, Jonathan Pryce is fantastic because I don't think Jonathan Pryce is bad a single minute on this entire show. He's so good. Again, Jonathan Pryce, one of the few actors who turned down Game of Thrones early on and then was able to come back to it. Thank God. There's been a couple actors that famously turned down. Brian Cox, obviously Logan Roy from Succession, very famously has been vocal about the fact that he turned down Game of Thrones because he didn't think that it was going to be anything good or big, and then obviously famously regretted it after the fact. But what's so fascinating about this scene is that this is the beginning of Marjorie starting to make a little bit of a comeback. And I will say that even though it is on the back burner, it obviously gets undercut by Cersei literally blowing everything up in the finale. That is kind of one of the few moments of victory where you think that the High Sparrow was won and gained this victory, but you could slowly start to see the wheels turning in Marjorie's head as far as how she's going to be able to manipulate this situation to her control. And this is the beginning of that, obviously, when she's able to point out what specific passage the High Sparrow was quoting when they first meet up with, from the Book of the Stranger, where she's like, yeah, you may be able to think you're running roughshod on me, but I know this game that's being played here. And it's the thing that I think made her character so endearing all the way back in season 2, which is when Littlefinger was trying to whisper in her ear about being the queen, and she's able to turn it right back around and be like, I'm loyal to my husband. Like Marjorie is a key player in this game, and she has not lost her stuff, even after having been in prison for that long.
No, I agree. I think Marjorie starts to realize how she's going to play the game with the Sparrow. And, obviously that's over keeping Tomlin in line and keeping the Sparrow, in power. And so it's going to be an alliance between Marjorie and the High Sparrow to basically control King's Landing and
she gets
wrestle
it,
power from Cersei.
She proves it too, because she's able to, even though she is not able to be freed, she's able to convince the High Sparrow to let her see Loras, which is obviously something that not even a couple episodes ago she never would have been able to get, and even though she sees that the High Sparrow's completely gotten to Loras and completely broken him, like he said, he's like, look, let them win, I don't even care anymore about any of this stuff, just let them win just so that I can make the torture stop. Loras has been completely broken by this point, but Marjorie, again, just that little moment right there is able to clue us into the fact that no, Marjorie's not done yet. Unfortunately, though, what does happen after the fact is a little bit of manipulation on Tommen's part. It's actually kind of crazy in hindsight to see the fact that in hindsight, Tommen fooled his mother and completely got to her, where Cersei visits with Tommen, and Tommen is like, oh, I have to tell you something, and it's super, super secret, which is where he tells her that, supposedly that the High Sparrow is planning on making Marjorie do a walk of penance as well. And so Cersei and Jaime are able to use that information to their advantage and bring that to Olenna and Kevin, and they're finally able to look, let's put this petty bullshit, anger and rivalry aside. You don't want Marjorie to do that walk of penance, and then to Kevin, they're like, and we know you hate these fanatics just as much as we do. We know you're only mad at us because we're the ones that allowed them to take control. We know that you want your son back. And they're finally able to reach an accord of some kind, which is where bring the goddamn Tyrell army in, something that should have happened the minute that Marjorie was taken from them. Again, I'm still baffled as to how Olenna was able to let that just kind of happen last season. I'm attributing that entirely to budgetary constraints, as far as how there wasn't a freaking war in the streets the minute that both of her grandchildren were arrested right in front of her. And what's it called? And so, but we're finally getting to it. They're like, bring the goddamn Tyrell army here. The Kingsguard will stand aside, and you guys go. We're going to kill as many of these freaking sparrows as we can. We're all the way up to that High Sparrow. Get Marjorie, Loras, and Tommen back. Get Marjorie and Loras back, and get back control of this city, But unfortunately, as we know, this has all been mechanized by the High Sparrow. This has all been a plan of his that he has been working, and unfortunately, as of right now, they've fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. So
yeah, we'll see how it pays off in the next couple episodes.
In a couple episodes, yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. It's this storyline, just how it develops in season 6. I think it is really good. It goes in the right direction. It ends with a bang, literally. So I think the main thing is I've always been kind of really down on the Sparrow storyline. I think it's a little far-fetched, like how it kind of came about and how easy Cersei sort of just let it into King's Landing. And I've always kind of argued that you needed something happening in King's Landing for 2 seasons because, everything's going on at the Wall, everything else is going on in Meereen and Essos, and you have to kind of wait till these storylines have enough time to develop to be able to get characters to start coming back for the end game. And this High Sparrow is just this storyline that just kind of goes on and on and on. You get the Walk of Penance with Cersei, which is a great sequence, and now in this season 6, you're getting a build up to what ultimately takes place with the use of the Green Goblin's liquid, or whatever you want to call it.
Green Goblin's liquid? You mean the wildfire?
Yeah, the wildfire. But Yeah, well, come on. It's pretty much the Green Goblin's
I'm
like
sorry,
green
no,
pumpkins or whatever.
you're good. I just think that of all the
But
external pop culture references that we've brought into this show, I think that that might be the funniest one yet. The
for some reason,
Green
it just
Goblin
reminds
reference
me of the Spider-Man, like because it's explosive and it just blows up.
of
And
the pumpkin bombs.
yeah, exactly. I know that's Hobgoblin, but
No, that's
right?
Green Goblin
Oh,
too.
it is Green Goblin.
That is
Okay,
Green
yeah.
Goblin. Green Goblin originated
Um,
those. Yeah, the Hobgoblin is literally the Hobgoblin. It literally rips everything from the Green Goblin with the exception of the costume.
gotcha.
Yeah,
So, the main thing is, it just reminds me of that, and we're about to get it, and we're about to get it in a big way, and it's an amazing opening sequence to that final episode of the season.
absolutely. Yeah, like I said, it's good to see that even with the writing becoming significantly weaker and weaker for the middle stretch of episodes, it's good to see that at the very least for the first stretch of the season and for the last stretch of the season, Benioff and Weiss were still putting their all into these episodes. So let's get to this final sequence. Speaking of ending with a bang, like, man,
Oh
Benioff and
god,
Weiss really have it in them for explosive finales.
I don't know about this, Dom, but I don't have much to say about this sequence. It's pretty.
It's pretty cut and dry. It's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, it's kind of
I
run
mean,
of the mill.
yeah.
Like Jorah and Dario kind of come in like swords ablazing, so to speak.
So to speak.
They're gonna save Daenerys.
Lot of bad comedy, I will say here too. With
Oh yeah,
Dario
yeah,
with the dagger, Jorah with the trying to fight with the guy and losing bad luck. I don't know what they were doing this season with trying to make it out like, oh, Jorah's not really that capable of fighting. It's like, what the fuck? Literally last season he was winning in the fight in the Meereen fighting piece. I was like, I don't know what they were trying to do. That was just
what's the
terrible comedy.
was it this episode where Dario's like, I could kill you, but then I would
No,
be the
it's like,
guy.
don't worry. It's like, I don't want to fight. If I win, I'm the shit who killed an old man. If I lose, I'm the shit who lost to an old man.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly. It's there's some good, back and forth kind of like buddy cop, I kind of hate you, but we'll learn to love each other by the end of the storyline. That type of action movie is playing out here. But they kind of sneak into camp. Again, like they stab him, the one guy with a sword, and it's like, well, they're just going to raise the alarm if we leave him like that. And then Dario just smashes him with a rock.
his head with a rock. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't cover the knife wound. Like,
Well, apparently it did. And because later on,
exactly with the chest.
hey, later on, like the guy's like, yeah, my member got his, head smashed in with the skull or with the rock.
Rockier, dumber than I thought they were. I mean, I'm not going to say they've ever been the brightest, but like, come on.
Yeah, but it was more like he assumed that it was some drunken spat, over potentially like another Dothraki woman, and he got himself killed. But, so the fact is that he bashed him with the rock, led to this like weird like dismissal of that character's death. For the most part, it's Dario and what's his face, Jorah, are going in to save her. It's kind of like the damsel in distress moment,
Right.
and then they
And
finally,
of course, they have to put a flip on it because
yeah,
have to put a twist on it.
yeah, they meet up with her, and then it turns out like she's like, no, like you're never gonna save me that way. Like heroics are kind of BS, but I got a plan. You got to help me out, and this is where Daenerys's cunning comes forth, and we can see that she's actually a pretty good leader. Is she decides to recreate what got the Dothraki to believe in her in the first place, and that's basically going into the fire. So she locks herself with all the coals in the big house.
With help from a random cameo from Hannah John Kamen too. This is still the point where Hannah John Kamen wasn't like super big yet. Like I think she had was 1 year out from being cast in the sequel to Ant-Man. But I don't know. That's just one of those things where it's like in the moment it was like, oh, that person looks semi sort of famous, but in hindsight it just kind of resembles stunt casting. But especially because it's a nothing part that they literally just gave to that actress. So
yeah. So the main thing is there's some choice words back and forth, and the calls just want to abuse Daenerys, and then give them to the blood raiders, and then if there's anything left, give them to the horse, or give her to the horses.
Well, if I can say one thing about the scene, though, the one thing that I will say is that I think that and this is kind of leading into my credence of where they were always planning on building to the Mad Queen. They just obviously stumbled and fell a lot in the last couple episodes. But the one thing I will say is that I do think that there's some credence there where she kind of starts off the speech by talking about that's the hut where she originally had her pregnancy ritual where she had to eat the horse's heart way back into season 1, and then how when she's talking about how the cows are all talking about splitting up, going to raid these different villages, and basically how small their thought process is. And what she's basically trying to get at is that if they kind of all pooled their efforts, just kind of how unstoppable she could be, and kind of because they're not capable of really pulling their efforts together, that she is kind of the natural inheritor of all of that power. And that, I will say, is some very Mad Queen, some very imperialist thinking right there. So that's why I don't completely disregard this sequence, and why it kind of still holds up
No,
to me.
I think her thought process makes a lot of sense, and their reaction, like I said, is that she's a woman, and
Right.
to them she's just a piece of meat, so to speak, and she should learn her place, and that's really what sets the situation on fire,
Literally.
because
I don't know how much more obvious we could be about it.
yeah, she's tired of listening to this crap, and she pushes the coals onto the ground, multiple pedestals of these basically, I imagine it's just wood, set up in a pyre type situation. So she pushes them over. It starts burning up the house from the inside. They all rush to the door, and we realize Jorah and Dario have locked the door from the outside,
Right.
killed all the other people that are guarding this hut. And essentially what happens is she keeps pushing the pedestals over, causing more and more damage. And at the very last moment, she corners the head, the one that was really saying that she was no longer going to survive, that they were going to kill her. And she actually does the deed and pushes one last pyre of fire onto him and kills him. And then she emerges, right?
Yep.
As we saw.
Very reminiscent, very reminiscent of the little callback to the finale of season 1 when she first walked into the funeral pyre, and
then everybody kneels down and credits.
Yep.
Everybody is on board. It's the new Dothraki army following Daenerys, and that's really what's going to help when they return to Meereen.
So let me ask you this last thing before we get out of here. Is this simply a repeat and a retread of previous territory, or is this kind of like an interesting and kind of good conclusion to kind of where she started versus where she is at now? Because if anything, I will say that these first couple episodes, as far as her being back with the Dothraki, I think are an interesting kind of callback to where she originally started, and kind of this idea of coming full circle. It was always something that I was really going to be interested to see how they were going to break that down in the books as well.
I would say that it's, I think it's good. I enjoyed it this go around. Her going to this place and, trying to be the fish out of water and figure out how she's going to, get to the top or get on top of this situation and come out, basically with an army. But I think it's almost like they don't spend enough time on this. She should be struggling a little bit for a couple more episodes, and at the end of the day, she kind of gets the upper hand and gets this army. I feel like she should have earned it,
right,
or had to work for it a little more.
Feels like it fell into her hands a little bit too quickly.
Exactly, it was almost
one
like
conversation with the other former Cal, and that was it.
Yeah, the end of last season is like, let's fly her right where she can get kidnapped, and then at the beginning of this season, we're just gonna literally have her get the Dothraki army, and then she's good to go. She can go back to Meereen and figure that situation out. It's could be a little too much too quick in terms of the way I'm thinking. It would have been nice to drag it out a little bit and make the reward of her sort of getting one up on all the calls, basically a little more rewarding. There's not enough build up to the storyline to be like, oh, she burned them alive and she took their armies. That's an awesome thing to happen, and I kind of got a little sense of like, yeah, let's go Daenerys. at the end of this episode. But I think with a little more build up, this could have been a perfect moment for this series.
So I think that the kind of the summation of this episode is, while it's got some great moments, they are not all necessarily earned because of the fast pace of the season, because of the fast tracking, because like I said, this season is still continuing in a little bit of the trajectory of season 5, where they're surpassing those rich, juicy character moments in order to continuously get to and build to the action moments. Because like I said, there's so much that happens in this episode that we almost forget that there's still so much more to happen in the next couple episodes before we even get to Battle of the Bastards.
I feel like we're moving more into the streaming world. You know, it's like I want to get through season 6 as fast as possible. So it's like I want to watch the next episode. You know, so this happens, right? She gets the Dothraki army, and I want to see what she does with it. And I think the pacing of the show changes to be like, all right, that happened. Let's go.
Right.
You know, the next episode is called The Door. So it's like, you know, as soon as we understand what that is, you know, it's like, you're like, let's go, episode 6.
Yes.
So there's a lot of like big moments happening in this that really push you to watch it a little bit faster. So, you know, if you're back when it was first airing and doing week to week, you're like, oh my God, I can't wait for next week. But in the world of binging, you could be like, oh man, let's go. Put on the next episode. I'm ready to watch.
Absolutely.
So I feel like they're starting to hit that stride. And, you know, earlier in the season where we saw things develop over time and a lot of the setups, you know, be paid off in time. I think here we're getting shorter sort of story arcs that basically pay off a lot quicker. And that's really in my mind, to get you to want to really binge watch the rest of the show. You know, I think season 7 and 8 are okay in terms of like, if you sit down and watch them back to back to back, and get through it, the pacing is pretty intense and moves forward. If you stop and think about things, you know, I think that's when the problems come.
Yeah, I couldn't think of a better place to leave off with. Yeah, 100%. We'll continue to cover this in the next couple of weeks as we get closer and closer and closer to the finale, the Iron Throne. Again, I'm going to keep hyping it up. Next week, we got another big one, like you said, the door, obviously, which is where we get the infamous hold the door moment. Obviously, that very heartbreaking moment that we get at the end.
Hold the pickles.
Hold the pickles, indeed. Pat.
His name could have been totally different if that was
totally different context if that had been.
Was it Hopel?
Who knows?
Hopi? I don't know. It's hard.
Who knows?
Let us know. I guess.
You're already brainstorming the jokes for next. You're already spoiling next week's episode as it is. Pat, where can the people follow you?
All right, man. I'm just at Patrick W. Huber on Instagram right now. So sharing things every once in a while. So, you know, check it out. That's where you can find what I'm interested in.
Of course, you can follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talking TV podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Be sure to also subscribe to us on YouTube and Twitch if you aren't already. Like I said, new episodes of the Talking Thrones podcast are uploaded every single Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and any other place where you can listen to podcasts. And as always, people, the battle for the throne continues. 12 seasons in a short film. Watch more fucking movies and stay frosty. We'll see you guys next time.